Hello, and welcome back to another episode of WeedBudz Radio. Lately, I've really been struggling trying to figure out how I am going to talk about my career, about my work, about my medication with the children in my life. And I have so many beautiful children, nieces, nephews, cousins, that I try to avoid the conversation as much as possible when anybody asks, what does Uncle Rye do? And I was in Clubhouse and I got to listen to our next guest speak about this very topic. And I'm really excited to have Susan join us just in time for Children's Book Week, because she has a book that might help all of us have these conversations. So Susan, thank you so much for joining me on WeedBudz.
Thank you so much for having me, Ryan.
So I have to ask, what possesses someone to write a children's book on cannabis?
Well, I mean, I never meant to. I never thought about being an author, but I'm a longtime cannabis activist. I've been an activist for well over a decade. And one of the big things that kept coming up over and over again was, well, what about the children? And I thought, what about them? I mean, that's just a silly argument. We talk to kids about grown-up things all of the time, or at least we should, have those conversations about racism, sexism, alcohol, all of the drugs, coffee, sugar, cannabis, sex, all of the things. And I just didn't understand it, but it persisted. It was a constant struggle. These parents groups would come to city council meetings and scream, what about the children? And we had legalized adult use in California in 2016, and it was still coming up. And in Santa Barbara, they were having a difficult time. They had this huge group that would show up. And I said, oh my gosh, I mean, really, we're still having this debate. I mean, do you have a lock on your medicine cabinet? Do you have a lock on your alcohol cabinet? Why is that your number one concern? So I figured, hey, I'm going to have to write a children's book and give grownups a tool just to start the conversation.
Incredible. And why do you think that we hide cannabis from our children? Because to your point, we probably, or most of us probably, have some conversations in regards to alcohol with youngsters. Why don't we talk about this?
Well, for some people, like especially legacy operators or people that were legacy operators, even if they've gotten a license, they're still hesitant because they've got that stigma so ingrained. And there's a little bit of PTSD, but mainstream folks, they're still, buying into the stigma. Jimmy Fallon roasted my book on The Tonight Show, and he just, in 2020, and he was laughing that grandma had cannabis growing in her garden. It's like, the stigma still exists.
And in your book, I mean, you have all of the themes that a great children's book should have: hope, encouragement, education. And what I noticed is, in listening to you speak, we should not be trying to restrict the curiosity of the youngsters around us. They have so much of that in their lives already. And I really appreciated in your book kind of how it was introduced to us. And so if you don't mind just kind of sharing, don't want to give anything away because we want you all at home to tune in and to purchase the book. We have a link to buy the book. I'm holding a copy right here. So head over to our show notes on WeedBudz Radio and we'll have the link there for you to purchase your own copy. But what I was fascinated by is the word marijuana or cannabis or anything else. It doesn't come up in the first few pages. And I really appreciate the way that you introduced this topic to us. And I'm wondering, can you share a little bit about how you introduce the conversation?
Sure. The goal of this book was to get it into hopefully some elementary school libraries and just be really mainstream and not come at it like an activist. But I am a grandma. I just had my my 6th grandchild was born 7 weeks ago.
Congrats.
Thank you. 2 girls and 4 boys. And, Grandma does have a garden, and I really believe in growing as much food as you can, eating organically. Fresher the better. We are what we eat. And so, I wanted to come at it from the perspective that, this is a conversation, not make it such a big deal. Look, we have all of these things to eat, and eating organic and fresh is best. And oh, by the way, also cannabis.
And I'm curious because I've never written a book. I can only imagine that it is extremely overwhelming and time consuming. Do you mind sharing with us what the process is like to bring a book to life?
Sure. Thank you for asking that. I've done lots and lots of different things in my life, and I figured, the best project is the one that's well researched. So I spent a year researching what it meant to be a first-time author. Was it possible for me to get published by a mainstream publishing company? No. You can't even have a GoFundMe because, hello, it's cannabis and children. What? So there was a lot of research done. I interviewed a lot of parents to see if it was even really needed. And yes, it really is. I mean, the stories that I heard from parents were just shocking. So I did the research and found that if you are a self-published first-time author, you're fortunate if you can sell 200 books over the lifetime of the book. And so I went into it realistically, knowing that it was going to cost me money, not make me money. And I raised $10,000, which I spent most of on the illustrations because that's super important for kids' books. And, went into it with my eyes open and it's something that needed to be in the world. And I was fortunate enough to be able to do that.
Amazing. What was the hardest thing about figuring out how to publish a book on your own?
Honestly, I'm self-taught on Photoshop, and I do all of my graphics and stuff for all of my socials. And I could not figure out how to lay out the book cover, the dust jacket.
Sure.
I had to pay BookBaby to do it for me. I couldn't figure it out.
Interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't even know where to start. So I am just so glad that not only were you able to start, but you're able to finish because this is a beautiful hardcover. I was reading it, not just all of the decisions in the graphics are gorgeous. I was overwhelmed by the amount of work that went into it. And clearly you must have a lot of passion because I know looking at this, there had to have been a lot of resources put into it, a lot of time and a lot of dedication to it. Is the activism to the plant, is that something that's been ingrained into you for a long time? Or was this something that was kind of a recent formation of I'm using cannabis and I want to have these conversations?
It's been a long time passion of mine. I used to be a very active member of the Latter-day Saint, the Mormon Church. And I was 33 when I sustained a head injury and ended up with a migraine that lasted 2 years. And I just couldn't find any Western medicine that would help me with this horrible migraine. And I ended up finding cannabis, and it was a life changer in so many ways. And I just promised myself that when my children were raised, I would dedicate myself to helping people understand the benefits of cannabis, because before I found it, I called the cops one time on these teenage kids because they were smoking something out of a pipe. And I said, come arrest these kids. They're smoking drugs. And the cops were like, well, is it crack? Is it weed? What is it? And I said, it's drugs. Come and arrest them. So that's where my head was. And then I found out what the truth was. And I just felt that I had a responsibility to help people that thought the way I did, to have an opportunity to realize the benefits.
And we're grateful that you did, because now we have a resource that we can use. And Susan, I was sharing with you earlier, this past week, a lot of the kids were out on spring break, and our production manager, his nephew was on spring break. And so he was helping around the studio here. And of course, when you're producing a cannabis related show, if you're working in the studio, you're going to hear me talk about it and meet interesting people to discuss it. And it was fascinating because cleaning the store and the showroom floor and whatever else, and he asked his uncle, what units of measurement is cannabis or marijuana sold in? A very innocent question. And Ethan, why do you ask? And he said, hey, if I'm going to be doing some cleaning around here, I'm going to have some questions. And I was like, of course he is. Of course he's going to have some questions. We're producing shows about cannabis, about marketing, about real estate. So I have questions about all of them. And so let's have this. And it was hard for Ethan and I to figure out what was the proper way to have that conversation. And so, Susan, do you mind, before we wrap up today, could you, if you were on the outside looking in and you were coaching us through this experience, do you have any feedback about what may have been a really solid way to answer the question and kind of open ourselves up to maybe answer more questions?
Well, I would argue that you waited a bit too long to start the conversation. My book is meant for around like 3 to 8 years old. The fact that he asked the question the way he did, he already knows, they already know, and the funny thing that just amazes me is that, especially with this pandemic lockdown, parents consuming cannabis at home and thinking that their kids don't know. It's like, sure. Come on, they know. And the only thing you're teaching your children is to keep secrets from each other. And that's not a good thing to teach them. So the sooner the better. Not necessarily smoking around them. In the book, Grandma is a good 30 feet away downwind while she's consuming her cannabis. She likes to smoke joints. And, it just, when you make it so weird and awkward or like, we can't talk about it and it's illegal and it's, what will the neighbors say? Then you're making it something that the kids want to consume maybe too early for their growing brains.
So I have 2 questions then. When you say growing brains, when is a good time, or when is the right time, or is there a right time for, when children say, well, hey, I'm 21 when I can drink beer or buy liquor. How old should I be when I can purchase cannabis? I mean, is that something like we should treat it the same, or is it different?
Well, the answer to most questions is it depends. Totally. And absolutely with cannabis, because it's such an amazing plant and there's so many parts of it. The thing is that the male brain, and I'm not a doctor, I'm not a medical person, but the male brain is fully developed somewhere around 23 to 25. I think the female brain is a little bit sooner. I hate to have alcohol be the first thing that a young person consumes. I fought for a little while for it to be 18, but then the science came out that the brain wasn't fully developed. But that being said, if a child has a different medical condition that the child needs, I forget the youngest child, but it's something like a couple weeks old, got sure. a medical recommendation. It depends.
And that's interesting, because that was more or less how we approached it. We just Googled, when does the adult brain, kind of reach its full development, and et cetera. And we did that process with him. So it was a very kind of like engaged process. We're all trying to Google, and it was fun because we were all learning, right? That his curiosity kicked off curiosity here in the studio. So it was beautiful. And my last question, Susan, how young is too young? So the book is for 3 to 8-year-olds. I think there's a lot of parents out there that might challenge, that might be too young. And so I'm just curious, what do you have? And I love, it depends, right? Because it is going to be tailored to your family, right, naturally. But, what went into that decision? Like, I want to have this conversation with 3 to 8-year-olds, and I want to normalize this before it's weird.
Yeah, well, I mean, as young as can just see the photos and understand or slightly understand what's going on, I think is fine for the proper age. I mean, just think about it. When you have a 18-month-old child that's about to touch something hot, you say no, right? Or if you have a glass of alcohol on the table, you say, and they go to grab it, you say, no, that's for grown-ups. It's just, you just talk about it on the level that is age appropriate.
And you meet everybody where they are. So ideally you have a realistically good idea of where your child is and the proper way to go about it. And again, Susan, for all of those tuning in, one last time, where do they go to purchase a copy of What's Growing in Grandma's Garden?
JustTakeCare.org/book is where you can find it.
Amazing. And of course, we will add that link to our show notes, so you can go directly to WeedBudZRadio.com, click on the show notes, and we will send you a direct link to Susan's book. Susan, thank you so much for making the time for us on WeedBudz Radio today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I look forward to all of you tuning in to the next episode. We're so grateful you're here. We hope you had an amazing 420. And if you head over to our website, WeedBudz Radio, you can see what Ethan and I were up to over the 420 holiday here in the state of Maine. And I'm really excited for you to hit the subscribe button, follow us, and always never miss an episode of WeedBudz Radio. Susan, thank you again so much. We'll see you all real soon.